our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be ever acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
This morning's gospel is a harsh one. It's one of those parables from Jesus that makes you feel like you need a second cup of coffee before you can really take it on. And I'm feeling that this morning, trust me. It is, after all, a parable of extremes, a parable that might excite within us a little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of wondering. Am I Lazarus, or am I the wealthy man? That's the tempting question to ask, isn't it? Lazarus, after all, is a sympathetic character. He's the one that we really want to be on the side of, isn't he? Lazarus suffered greatly during life, but he doesn't seem to have complained about it much. He makes his way through life and finally is welcomed into the afterlife with some sort of comfort and joy, and even the wealthy man can't touch him there. And then there's the wealthy man. He's the villain we love to hate. He's such an extreme, isn't he? Dressed in fine robes with a gate all the way around his home, he can feast and not even think about the people just outside, not even notice them. At the end of the day, we're kind of surprised, aren't we, that he even knows Lazarus' name. It's a story of extremes, and just in case we didn't get that before, we have a chasm fixed between the two, between hell and heaven, between the good and the evil. The chasm is what really brings the fear in all of this, isn't it? It's so final. And the temptation is to read this parable and say Jesus is telling you how to get into heaven or how to resign yourself to hell. The temptation here is to say, am I Lazarus or am I the wealthy man? But my hunch is that very few of us walk around in long purple robes. My hunch is that very few of us have a gate around our homes. So it is pretty easy also to read this parable and say, I'm not the wealthy man. I must be Lazarus, and move on and say this has very little to say to my life. But if we do so, I think we forget the most important part. I don't think in the end that Jesus was telling you how to get into heaven or how you might end up in hell. I think Jesus was trying to get us to look at the chasm in between. Let me explain. Here's an example. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to serve as a pastoral intern. I was exploring my calling, and I had been accepted to a big castle of a church in Northwest DC. A few blocks from the White House. I was so excited. And so I took the long journey in on my first day. I was very anxious not to be late, to make a good impression, to do this right. I had to take a car ride to the train station, find a place to park, get on the train at the right time, take a 30-minute train ride into the city, get off the train at the correct stop, and then walk 3/4 of a mile into the church and not get lost. I was worried about it, to say the least. So by the time I got off the train, I was setting off at a trot, and so was everybody else. It was just about rush hour in Washington, D.C. And if you've never seen rush hour in Washington, D.C., don't. It's not a pretty sight. There were buses and bikes and pedestrians weaving in and out between each other and the taxis, which really didn't care if you were a pedestrian on the road. Everyone was not looking at anyone else. They were just weaving, except for a few interns that you could recognize by their very ill-fitting suits. And they were looking at everybody trying to catch the badge. Everyone wore a badge for where they worked, and if it had a certain color on it, you knew they were important enough that you had to greet them. But lost in all this hustle and bustle was the familiar sight on every corner of a person sitting there with a cardboard sign and a cup out in front of them. Nobody even even met their eyes. Somebody might occasionally drop a coin or a bill in the cup without even saying anything and hurry on. And I have to confess to you that that morning, caught up as I was in the worry and anxiety of getting there on the first day, I did the same thing. I wove in and out of everybody. I came finally upon this huge traffic circle and saw on the other side my destination, this castle of a church going up into the air. And I took some very ill-advised steps to get across that traffic circle and into the church. I went hustling up the stairs after getting buzzed in and arrived at the pastor's office exactly on the dot of 9 a.m. And I let out a sigh of relief. The irony is that summer, as I would find out about 30 minutes later, I would be working primarily with the women's homeless shelter across the street. It was called N Street Village. It had been started by the church and was a major partner in their work. And I would spend the summer with, as my teachers, the women who lived there. They would teach me about the city. They took me under their wing as someone who was new to all of this, and they taught me so much about being a good woman, about life in general, about loving those who have not been kind to you, and about survival in a world that doesn't care about you. One day, we were teaching a high school class, and I came along for the ride, and one woman who had taken me particularly under her wing was teaching that day. She talked with them for a while about homelessness in Washington, D.C., and the wealth gap and everything else, and as she did so, she gave them one tip that stuck with me. She said, "Now I want to tell you that when you walk along the street, you will see people without a home everywhere. Don't just walk by. Don't ignore them entirely. Turn your head across the street. Meet my eye. Say good morning. Shake my hand. Even if you have nothing to give, acknowledge that I am there, and I'm a human being. Because if you don't, you take that last thing from me. You make it seem like I don't even exist." I felt the shame welling up in me. But it's what we do, isn't it? We hurry on, we put our head down, we move forward. Whether it's from fear or embarrassment or not being sure what to do, we keep on moving. We ignore the person sitting at our proverbial gate and allow a chasm to open up between us. A chasm between who is worth noticing and who is not. And it makes us no better than those interns walking down the street looking at your badge to see if they need to say hello to you. We open up a chasm between who is a child of God and who is not, who is worthy of love and who is not worth our time. I think at the end of the day, Jesus wasn't teaching us about how to get into heaven or hell in the afterlife. Jesus was teaching us about heaven and hell on this world today. There are chasms all around us. Some of them are opened up by wealth and poverty, by homelessness. Some of them are opened up by race or gender. Some of them are opened up by politics or differences of opinion. Some of them are opened up by those who just really annoy us and those we get along with. But they're everywhere around us. These chasms between who we have to love and who we don't. Who we have to notice and who we don't. Who we take time to serve and who we wouldn't. We might spend a whole day helping our brother, sister, or uncle, or aunt, but we probably wouldn't give 2 seconds to somebody on the street sitting there with a paper cup and a cardboard sign. The tricky thing and the beautiful thing about the gospel, about who Jesus is that Jesus sat down with all those on the other side of the chasm. Jesus sat down with the sinner and the tax collector, with the poorest of the poor and the woman who nobody else noticed. Jesus sat down and ate dinner with those who were hated and reviled and who nobody wanted to acknowledge existed. Jesus sat down and ate dinner, and in doing so said, "This too is a child of God," and perhaps more so, with more to teach us, just as Lazarus had more to teach the world than the wealthy man did. It's good news for us because it means that Jesus sits down with us too. Even in our sin, even when nobody notices us, even when we are unloved or forgotten. But with most good news, there comes a challenge for us as Christians. Because as Christians, we've said somehow that we are going to not just receive that love, but follow Christ. As Christians, we've said that we're not just going to take in that grace, but share it with the world. And that's the tricky part. Because it means we can't just rest comfortably in that love. We can't just get into our mansion and eat that sumptuous feast before us. As Christians, that means that we have to step out and step across the chasm. As Christians, that means we have to notice the person sitting outside our gate. We have to take the time and the inconvenience and, yes, the sacrifice to love our neighbor, not just the neighbors it's easy to love, not just the neighbors who love us, but even the neighbors it is hardest for us to love. And perhaps more difficult, even the neighbors that it is least convenient for us to love. But if we follow this calling, if we live it out, however imperfectly, as we will no doubt fail at it, we have the possibility of building up the kingdom of God where we are. We have the opportunity to work to create that heaven on earth that we are all hoping in. That kingdom of God that will one day break in, where there is no more homelessness, there is no more chasm between us, there is no more brokenness or pain or sickness or poverty or suffering. No more racism or xenophobia or 100 other things that plague us and divide us and ask us to hate our neighbor. There will be only life and life abundant as one people under God, one people with God living among us, even across nations, even across hatred, even across divides. And I challenge you that the people who will be sitting with you as one in that people, the people who you will find sitting across the table with you, might be those you've least expected, might be the stranger from far away, might not have spoken the same language you spoke, might not have lived the same life you lived. But our hope, our faith, is that in Christ we will be made one. In Christ that chasm will be thrown out. The trick is for us to cross it now. So I challenge you to ask yourself where the chasms are in your life. I challenge you to get up and step across them even though it's hard, knowing that as you do, you might just find that Jesus is already there to welcome you. Thanks be to God. Amen. Amen.